Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that this webcast will be recorded and available for replay. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please reach out via the chat feature. We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Please log them via the Q&A feature or the chat box. As many of you know, my name is Stephanie Hung, and I'll be hosting this webcast with Fred from Driven 4. Before we begin our discussion, let me tell you a little bit about MRC. We were founded in 1999, initially as a support group handling renewals and reactivating customers. With great success and time, we were brought on as a full partner. We're currently one of PTC's Gold Channel Advantage partners. We have the great pleasure of working with companies all over North America and throughout many industries and over many PTC product lines. If you have any questions regarding any PTC product, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I'll pass the ball to you, Fred.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. Nice for you to make time for us this afternoon. Fred Bellio, managing partner and co-founder of Driven 4. I'm just going to go to the next page. So we'll talk a little bit about Driven 4. We'll talk about our capabilities, but we'll spend the majority of our time talking about PTC's Windchill product and its capabilities within the management of engineering and product data. And then we'll open it up to questions as we discussed earlier. So thanks again for joining us today. On an introduction, Driven 4 started in 2017. We were founded with people like myself who worked on the other side. So we're not a consultancy group that was founded from consultants. We're people that were actually working at different organizations that were trying to do the same things that you do, which is trying to implement solutions for your companies that drive a difference and a technology advantage for you and your company. The one thing that we concentrate really is around product development, be it the product lifecycle management side or connected operations that associate from an engineering perspective, both for validation, but also for manufacturing and service. We believe it's necessary to drive a complete solution set for the company to be able to be secure. And the other thing that we always take into consideration is the ability to manage the cybersecurity threat within that environment so that none of your intellectual property gets into the hands of people that you don't want it to be in. So that's a brief introduction of Driven 4. What do we focus on from a customer perspective is really driving competitive advantage. We have customer bases in all different industries, be it aerospace, space, medical devices, consumer products, automotive, and we like to be able to share those kinds of learnings across industries. They're not a competitive nature, but it also brings different perspectives as required when you think about all the things that are happening based on different industries. Also, we kind of look at our approach being a little different. We stay away from the, I'll call it point solution. We really are very big at trying to understand the holistic picture and how to help your organization from start to finish. And when we go from there, we offer a couple of different things. We like to set the concentration on both the strategic aspect of the organization, what we're trying to do, how we're trying to accomplish it, and then from there, the strategy and how do we convert that into an executable process-driven technology implementation. And then what we find is a lot of customers have not the will or the ability to manage and support these organizational technologies once they're implemented, so we can help you do that as well. Our frameworks are taken from our 30 plus years of experience in industry, and we take those and kind of use those as development of use cases when it comes to how do we deliver these to an actual implementation standpoint. That's just a brief introduction. I just want to get to the capability slide. For me is very important because this is the one thing we focus on. So we focus on digital transformation, and our definition of digital transformation is really, I think, a little different than most. Every company kind of designs and edicts what that means for them. But we look at all the way from the beginning of portfolio and product management. So when you look at innovations, ideas, how do you strategize around how you're going to build your platforms, how you're going to modularize these actual elements into your product lines, all the way through design, how you actually validate that design, how do you go to manufacturing and service, and then integrating that philosophy of a connected product, a connected operation aspect, so that we can actually build it from end to end. And then the one piece that we make sure that we include, because a lot of companies no longer just build hardware, mechanical hardware devices. There's a lot of embedded software that needs to be actually integrated within the package stream. And then how do you visualize that information with different applications such as apps or web-based kind of configurations for visualization. The one last thing I'll talk about is we found through our experience that today technology actually works as designed. It's not the same thing that we were talking about 20 years ago, but now actually technology works. Where the challenge is on the people side. So concept of organizational change management, understanding the impact, understanding the resistance to why people want to implement these kinds of technologies is a core competency that we have to bring into the equation in order to be able to build a roadmap and a journey, because all these kinds of concepts are not a one and done. They're a building of different pillars of actual technology and experience and expertise that need to be grown and actually fulfilled from start to finish. So the change management aspect is critical to the long-term success of these programs. And then from there, I just want to talk a little bit about digital thread. We hear a lot of words about, we have to make digital thread. Well, I'll call it a combination of things that goes with that. The way we kind of put the pieces together is really we start at the beginning when you have a customer and you have requirements that come from that customer or needs, and then you need to build that into the requirements for the program and the product that you're offering, both from what the product needs to offer, but also keeping in mind any regulatory needs that need to be satisfied as you go. And then from there, we take that through product design, where we start looking at the building of the 3D elements, both from a product perspective, but also as we build from a manufacturing engineering aspect as we go through the cycle. And then really establishing, I call it the lifeline of a company, which is the bill of material. Bill of material gives the organization the same language to discuss on how we're going to manage the product through the requirements, through the purchasing, through the design, through the delivery, all the way through to service. And then one key aspect to keep in mind when we talk about digital thread is really trying to modularize and architect repeatable and reusable aspects. So when you look at your platforms in your family, you're actually reusing content, reusing design, reusing parts to be able to fulfill a long-term goal, but also sustainable when it comes to product cost as well as product service. And then you take all that information, and what's been really lacking in industry for a long time is the ability to visualize this information throughout the enterprise, so that your sales and marketing team can see this product information, so your vendors can see it, so your engineering manufacturing teams can actually visualize this contextually, so that it drives the ability to understand what's going through development, where it goes through, where it's at a particular stage through your development cycle, all the way through to production till end of life. And then one of the key aspects that we want to make sure we consider is most companies are not totally vertically integrated. So they work with a supply chain. So we have to make sure we integrate that supply chain mechanism all the way through from the beginning of the product to the end of life. And of course, we want to make sure that we integrate, I'll call it our ERP side, so scheduling when it comes to manufacturing execution, as well as the tooling side, and then bringing all that information so it can be reused again, not recreated, but reused from a customer-facing information, be it on your websites, be it on your literature, be it on, service technicianal kind of information so that we drive a consistent use of the information. And then one aspect that we like to put through I call it the end, but it's also the very beginning, is an integrated quality by design. So you build design quality in and you actually execute it throughout the process. So when you look at a digital thread, that's how we kind of conceptualize the different components of that so that you can keep it in context as you go through the life cycle of your enterprise. And then from there, I think what we want to do is really start talking about PTC's Windchill product line. It's been in existence for probably 20 plus years. It has evolved into many, many different kind of capabilities as we have seen it from day one to as it exists today. So I'm going to kind of drive you through a holistic picture, and then I'm going to go through a few use cases of what we see are very, I'll call it usable context in how to implement these type of technologies within your organization. So we look at it from two concepts, right? So most product development companies, base companies have an innovation funnel and they got a product development funnel. Windchill can provide the, I'll call it framework for managing both of those, both on the innovation side from driving, concepts and the innovation funnel from ideas that you get both internally from your employees or externally from your customer base or your vendors on ideas that we should be thinking about to be able to bring to market. And then going through that process within the actual innovation cycle, going from design to selection of that actual concept, validating that concept so that you put it on the shelf and it's ready for production development when it comes to driving a product development process. What we found, and a lot of customers of ours have learned, some easily and some the hard way, is to keep those two processes separate. You never want to have an innovation cycle within your product development cycle, because then what happens typically, it elongates your product development cycle, sometimes to the point where you miss the market opportunity. So you want to have the innovation cycle to be able to say, I've got these new technology advancements I'm going to implement within my new products, but I'm going to do it in a phased manner so I minimize my risk, both from a validation into the new product line, but also on the market opportunity from a timing perspective. That then flows into the product development enterprise process, which goes into multiple different aspects. Requirements management, you got your CAD, you got your CAM, you've got your CAE from a validation from the digital side. You go through the physical validation processes. You have software nowadays that has to be developed along with controls. You manage all these components and all these different, I'll call it product designs, and you look at how do you make sure your vendors are included. And vendors can be done in multiple fashions. You can have development kind of partners as well as just vendors or a combination of both. And then from the aesthetics, looking at the styling of how your product's going to be done, what it looks like, making sure you have the material there for marketing, make sure you've integrated both quality from design, but also quality from a production perspective. And then looking at what you can do to automate both the manufacturing processes, the simulation of what is the could be kind of manufacturing quality and output, as well as looking at how do we build the service processes that are going to be necessary once the product goes into marketplace. And then if you think about that from I'll call it departmental functional view, we also have the enterprise context when it comes to managing the portfolio and the projects, understanding, I call it the enterprise architectural aspect, which is key when you think about in today's world, understanding the process side, the technology side, and the data that gets evolved and created from those two. We find if you don't look at this from a holistic standpoint, you end up creating a series of silos that causes multiple, I'll call it, interesting opportunities for disparate information, for duplicate information, and for information that does not match where it needs to match. And if you think about it, it's a control factor from every item and part and then how it's configured in the bill of material, and then how do you manage that change throughout the actual life cycle of the product, be it in the innovation cycle, the development cycle, validation cycle, production cycle, or even into service. So when you think about Windchill, it can actually configure and help you manage your whole product environment from start to finish. And then, Scott, there was many kind of opportunities here to put in 5, 10, 15 different things, kind of, what do we see from an implementation scenario? What I did is I kind of put it into 5 major buckets, and we'll talk about each one of these in more detail. But what we see most times is customers have a need that needs to be done. And again, keep it in context holistically. So this is kind of an evolution model as we go through this. The first aspect that most companies like to do is keep their CAD data controlled. So the management of that data, make sure we can integrate the modelers that you have, be it PTCs, Creo, or if it's competitor products like SolidWorks or other actual integration modules that are necessary for different CAD modules, and managing the check in, check out as we go. From there, people evolve typically and manage just the engineering aspect of the bill of material. So the CAD plus any engineering could be requirements, could be specs, it could be validation instructions that go with that. And then typically from there, we also see the change aspect. So instead of going from, CAD to engineering to enterprise, we stop at the engineering aspect of the data and we manage the definition, the part as we actually manage the change going from design to a finished release product piece as we go into production. And then typically once we see those 3 things done, then we start to have the conversation around part classification. And we'll talk about, how do you classify parts? How do you make it so that you can reuse parts? How do you minimize duplication of effort? And I'll call it proliferation of similar part types. And then we get that expanded view that goes into the enterprise side. So now you're not only talking engineering, but you're talking manufacturing, and you're talking service, and you're talking all the components related to the product parts, be it process as well as engineering. And then how do you manage those changes that are going to occur across the actual enterprise? So we'll talk about each one of these now. So on the CAD data management side, one of the things that is extremely important is the seamless integration of any modeler that you had from a CAD perspective, so that when you're doing the work or your CAD designers are doing the work, the integration into Windchill. So you start managing the output of CAD in a very seamless fashion is extremely important, where you can start looking at managing authoring and overwriting so that when the individual is doing something, somebody else can't overwrite on it. It actually provides extreme robust document control. So when you think about the advantages of what you're trying to do, you're trying to minimize all those, I'll call it separate vaults that people have that could be their PC or their local drives. You're now making this available so that from a collaboration standpoint, everybody's talking about the same context of the product and understands how product of the actual evolves as it's getting changed to that, who's owning those parts, how do you have that collaboration between the individual designers as you go through this, but also understanding the capability of going back into the design and seeing the history of how somebody's evolved this as they go in and checking in different versions of this actual particular part, component, or assembly. And then looking at the status of the part. So most companies have a product development process. So it could be a concept, and a concept goes from work in progress to release, and the concept can go to design, and then design validation, and then into production. So multiple different aspects of how far the product has gone within the actual context of its release. And then the idea that you're never going to lose data because somebody's left the company. You can't find the data. The data could be, same parts, same revisions, same numbering schema, but it's 7 of the same different files. Which one's the correct one? So you eliminate all those if you kind of figure out, hey, the first aspect of what I want to manage is the CAD data side of that. And then once you've got that kind of under control, we see the next introduction is the engineering bill of material, where you look at, hey, I've got a product structure now, and product structure could have sub-assemblies, and the sub-assemblies could have parts, and we can start managing the configuration of those between multiple products as you have a family of products. And then understanding, how do I make sure that under each, I'll call it item, assembly, or component, I have the needed information. So I have the requirement, I have the specifications, I have the CAD. If you're still doing 2D drawings, 3D models, how do I put that in a bucket of information where everybody has access to it? And then when you start looking at, hey, I'm going to start reusing this in a portfolio of product under that family, it becomes extremely powerful when it looks at the reuse capabilities of what you have and how you're going to reuse that technology, I'll call it, that you created throughout the product lifecycle. It also provides to you, as you're going through different instances, as you go from one product line to another, can you actually reuse certain aspects of things? Do I have to create a new one, and why? We look at that being extremely powerful, because I think the last number that I remember from research is about $21,000 for every part that gets created, not the actual part itself and the cost of the part, but the internal cost of creating a part number, managing the actual life cycle, managing the cycle of, I'll call it, procurement and the life of that product. I think it was $21,000 for a good sized company as you go through that. So you'd love to minimize the duplication of new parts if at all necessary, if at all possible, should I say. And then from there, we go from, okay, we've got a bill of material, we've got the information. Now I need to manage the actual change around this process and this information. So the great thing around here is we not have gotten too far. We're not into manufacturing, we're not into service yet, but from an engineering perspective, I can now understand the full impact of any change that I'm going to propose. And when you look at that, you say, okay, so it's my component, but my component is part of an assembly. That assembly now has to change as well. Are there other pieces within that actual enterprise assembly that needs to change as we go forward? So you can see all those impacts, assess the actual change before you actually decide upon it. One of the things that comes with this also is a series of metadata that typically before you would write out. You would write out as a engineering, spec in a new piece of paper, and you would draw it up, and you might even put it in the drawing, some of these things. But now you can actually annotate these within metadata, which are typically just attributes around a part, an assembly component, a structure, so that you can actually give real context around what you're trying to do. And then you can make sure that you have all the information required. So if you think about it, sometimes if you do it from a piece by piece, I still may change the requirement, or I still may change the CAD, or I still may change the spec. When you look at that product change from an engineering context, you can make sure that all the actual information that needs to change is actually part of the bucket of information that goes through that change and gets released at the same time. And we can set up different rules as different ways of companies like to work, so that we can drive the right, I'll call it, process on how we manage that change and what elements get changed or put into that change from a document perspective. And then from there, that gives us the opportunity also to provide visibility, both internally to manufacturing and service of what's coming down the pipeline, but also from a vendor or partner outside, we can start giving visibility to them as we go through this process as well. So we've talked about 3, I'll call it, within the context of engineering, and that's where we typically see companies start when we look at the implementation of Windchill. And then once they've got a good handle on that, and we look at the next piece is, how do we start classifying parts? And there's a couple of different ways to do this. One of them is there's a set of parts that people and companies buy that are, I'll call it off the shelf. So those type of parts get classified. We make sure that you understand the vendors understand what the requirements are, but you're kind of making sure that there's a set of those that the company is authorized for use so that it just doesn't proliferate as it goes forward. The second piece is your internal components and managing those into different types of classifications. And why is that important? Typically in two manners, right? One is from a sourcing perspective, it allows concentration when it comes to the ability to go source X amount of components for this type of component, be it a pump, be it a fuel agitator, all different kinds of different classifications you can add. But it also is extremely important because most of these types of components have regulatory compliances. So now you know how to apply those regulatory compliances to those particular classified products so that you don't miss anything that's required legally to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And as we've talked about before, it's a great way to reduce complexity, but it also provides sustainability. And what I mean by that is you can actually concentrate specific product classifications into the types of materials you're looking for, the type of specs that you're looking for. So from a compliance perspective, from a sustainability perspective, if you're trying to make sure that certain components only use certain types of materials, you can integrate that within the product classification work as you go forward. So now that you've got your parts, your CAD, your engineering bill of material, your product specification and classifications, and now your change when an engineering perspective comes around, the one piece that we see where a lot of people get extreme value is now taking that and expanding it throughout the enterprise. So we've got all the same concepts, but now we have it, and I call it in trifold. So not only does it hold the same type of value for engineering, now I'm incorporating my manufacturing information. So if I've got tooling, if I've got work instructions, if I have different aspects that I need that are going to accompany the manufacturing aspect of my product, I can incorporate that within my bill of material and the contents around that, as well as extending that out to the service side. So if you think about, there's usually a set of people that are set aside in the service organization to be able to understand any change that comes down the actual pipeline of how that's going to impact my serviceability of that product as we go forward. So if you think about now assessment of what that change is and the impact of what that needs to be done, now I understand all the engineering work that needs to be completed, but I also understand all the manufacturing work that has to be associated with it. And I know the service piece needs to be done as well. So when you think about it, a change does not actually finish by just engineering work. It also has to be accompanied and completed at the same time on the manufacturing side and on the service side, so that from an enterprise level, I know the work, I know the cost, and I know that I have all the content that is necessary for me and the organization to drive that change into production. And then you take that concept and you say, okay, I've got a bunch of vendors. I have engineering vendors. I've got vendors that support my service. I got vendors that support my manufacturing colleagues. Now I can take that same kind of collaboration and bring that to the whole enterprise, both from the internal side, but also the extended supply chain. And then when you think about it, we now have full control when it comes to product, the configuration from a structure and change, but also from its evolution from engineering, from manufacturing to service to end of life. So if you think about the capabilities and the value that Windchill brings to you, it is there where the actual value is exponentially grown when it comes to the ability of what Windchill can provide for you from start to finish. It also completes the digital kind of thread when it comes to how do I validate what's happening both in engineering, let's say from a product validation side, but also manufacturing and service. So I can put those components together and drive the right solution set for everything I need. So hopefully this helps from an understanding of the, I'll call it the power of Windchill, the ability to kind of evolve in its use in your organization and drive in the right context of, a single source of truth when it comes to product information, be it irrespective of which department is actually creating it, be it engineering, manufacturing, or actual service. So with that, I'll open it up to questions and back to Stefani to kind of take us through that as we go.
Thanks, Fred. Such good information. Let's see here. I'll give it a little bit before some questions come through. But as I'd like to mention, both MRC and Drone 4 are really great resources. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions, if you'd like a more in-depth overview of your current products, if you'd like us to assist you with well, specifically more so driven for assist you with what solutions would be great for your particular case scenario. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I will provide my contact information at the end over here so that you have that, but you could also reach out to your designated account manager. With that being said, I don't see any questions coming through, Fred. I'd like to take the time to thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation and such great information, lots of information to think about, and such great solutions too.
Thank you very much for the time. And I look forward to talking to people as we go through this journey together.